Hi, we're here today with Judge Sandra Moss of the Court of Common Pleas of the First Judicial District of Pennsylvania. Hi, Judge Moss.
Hello.
Hey, thank you very much for coming here and being interviewed today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Well, I appreciate that. Um, I think that the best place to start is at the beginning and talk, if you would, tell us about your early family life, family makeup, and perhaps where you were born and that sort of thing.
Okay. I was born in Vineland, New Jersey, which is a little farm town about an hour or so from Philadelphia. And the reason I was born in Vineland, New Jersey is that my grandfather was a union organizer and a labor leader in Philadelphia. He helped start the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, and he ended up for that in Moyamensing Prison.
Oh, gosh,
And,
I'm sorry
yeah,
about that.
my grandparents lived about a block from where I live now,
Uh-huh.
which upset my grandfather that I had moved back into, what he considered at that point the ghetto. And I said that the thing that would have upset my grandmother is what I paid for my house, given for what they sold it for. But once he got out of jail, she had come from Poland. Her family had gone to jail, and she said, enough with jail, and they moved to Vineland, which was actually a hotbed of socialism
What do you know?
yeah, and
Farm workers
communism.
and such.
And when I ran for judge, my grandfather, who died at 102, came to me and he said to me, if they ever ask you, I went to meetings, but I never carried a card.
Well,
It made me laugh. But I did get a lot of union support coming from my grandfather. So we moved.
doesn't hurt, especially in Philadelphia. It doesn't
Yeah.
hurt, right?
I told them the story, and the
Mhm.
union said, we're behind you if your
Yeah.
grandfather, went to jail for us.
Right, yeah.
And that made my grandfather happy. And I moved, we moved to Camden
Uh-huh.
when I was a little girl.
Yeah.
And then as my dad did better, we moved out to Pennsauken, and then finally to Morristown. I was in college by then. But I went to grade school in Camden and junior high and high school in Pennsauken.
Uh-huh. And Morristown's a nice town, right?
It's a beautiful
Yeah.
town. I mean, it's a town I don't know well because, as I said, by the time my parents moved, I was already at Temple.
Okay.
But it was a town that my kids remember well because that's where I took them to visit their grandparents.
Right.
So it's sort of from there.
Now you say you were at Temple, so that was for your undergraduate work at
Yeah,
Temple?
I went in 1960, I guess, and graduated in 64.
Now, when we were talking earlier, you mentioned, I suggested that maybe we would talk about what prompted you to go to law school and become a lawyer. But as you told me, your real goal was to become a judge.
To be a judge. And I was a little kid, and I saw a movie with my dad. It wasn't about the law, it was some kind of a love story. But everybody came in front of a woman judge at the end of this story, and she was very homely. She had a beak nose, I remember, and her hair was pulled back in a bun.
Yeah.
But she brought everybody together, and they all kissed, and everybody was happy, and the movie was over. And I can remember, I was 8. I turned to my father, and I said, I want to be like her. I want to be a judge. I had no idea what a judge did, but it seemed like she made everybody happy.
Right.
And my father said to me, she's an old maid, and if you become a judge, you're going to be an old maid too. And I didn't want to be an old maid.
Well, that didn't come
But
true then. No.
when I was dating as a teenager,
Yeah.
the joke in my house was every time I'd break up with a boy or he'd break up
Yeah.
with me,
Uh-oh.
my father would say, don't worry about it, you can be an old maid judge. I mean, my family thought it was funny. I think they were all a little shell-shocked when I actually did it. And I wasn't an old maid.
And to a certain extent, being a judge and solving other people's problems, although not everybody may be happy with the result, it is in some ways a way to put a positive ending on the situation.
It is. I mean, the funny part about it is that I had told you that I became a litigator because I had the firm belief that, and I wanted to be a trial judge. I didn't really want to be an appellate judge.
Well, to explain that too, because that's interesting also.
Because I think I felt as I began to litigate that the real issues were created in the trial court. As a litigator, I had a chance to bring up issues There was a case of first impression at one point
Okay.
involving an issue that I brought up that lawyers cited to me while I was on the bench because they obviously must have read the case and saw my name on it.
Uh,
Um, and you have a chance to change things. And as a judge, you frame the issues. When I listened to something, if I thought the credibility of a witness was the reason I was going to use,
yes.
the credibility of a witness is rarely overturned in the appellate court.
Oh,
If I wanted to hit the real issue, maybe the issue of first impression, the constitutional issue,
yes.
then we could do that.
Uh-huh.
To me, there's excitement and creativity in the trial court. Not that there isn't in the appellate court, I'm sure
Right.
there is.
Yeah.
That's why our law evolves. But for me personally,
Yeah.
that's where the action was, and that's what I wanted to do.
Well, I have to say that you appear to have learned your lessons well.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Now, in the uh, you practiced. I take it that you did practice as a litigator for some years.
Actually, not as long as people might have liked. Might have wanted to be a judge, but I certainly didn't take a direct route.
Yes.
I went to college, and I was not pre-law because the whole idea of really going to law school was something that nobody took seriously. I
Mhm.
really could do this.
Mhm.
In the 60s.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah.
Yeah, in the 60s, well, at least from my family background, you went to college to get married.
Yeah.
And,
Okay.
and so not being able to be a lawyer, I married one. And I put him through, I married a law student and put him through Columbia.
Mm-hmm.
And then they were the days when Miranda came down and Escobedo
Sure.
and Gideon. And he might not have enjoyed them, but boy, I couldn't stop reading them. I thought it was pretty terrific. And I was an advertising copywriter,
Uh-huh.
and I then had children and quit. Once you had kids, you just weren't supposed to work.
Yes.
And I had two that were, I guess, once my daughter was, when I went to law school, my daughter was 3.5 and my son was 1.5. And I felt at the time, how hard could it be? I was tired of being home and picking up toys and stuff. I still wanted to save the world.
Well, being a mother is pretty hard. So law school
it was
can't
very
have been-
hard.
Yes.
But I didn't see it that way at the time. I was greatly mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
I can say that if I really knew what it was going to be like, I never would have had the courage to do it. I was the valedictorian of my class in college. I had like a 3.9 average.
Yeah.
And I thought, how hard could it be? It didn't occur to me that I lived at home, never washed a dish or any clothes, had my own car, had no money worries, and my job was to get all A's, and I could do that. But when I decided to go to law school,
Yeah.
and nobody in my family was particularly happy about it, when I did that, I didn't realize that I had 2 children. I had a 5-bedroom house. My husband left soon after, so I found myself being a single parent.
Oh.
And I went to school at night because I figured I'd be a mom during the day and I'd go to school
see.
at night, and how hard could it be? It was horribly hard. It was awful.
What do you know? Yeah.
It was awful.
How hard could it be?
Right. And so once my husband left, there were money issues. I had part-time jobs. I applied for food stamps.
Mm-hmm.
And I was at Temple pre-Peter Leocoris, right pre-Peter Leocoris.
Mm-hmm.
And the dean at Temple, Ralph Norvell, didn't particularly care for women being in law school.
Oh.
And the only reason I got in, he informed me, was because my average was so high, and Temple was in the process of trying to raise its its mean average nationally.
Yes.
So all he cared about, he said, today I probably could have filed a suit against the school.
Yeah, right.
All he said that the only reason that they wanted me is to get my average. He didn't care if I stayed 10 days. And he told me he didn't think I ever could be a lawyer.
Oh,
that I
that's
didn't
kinda-
have what it took.
It doesn't seem like a good idea for a law school dean to be saying such
Well,
things.
there were only 15 women out of 175
Well,
in my
yeah.
night school class, and I think he would have been pleased if we all went.
Sign of the times.
Yeah, and so I decided that he was right.
Mm.
He was the dean. What did I know?
Yeah.
So I decided to write a letter of resignation and just give up. And this was in my second semester, right before finals of my first year.
Uh-huh.
And I
But
wrote a letter of resignation, and I went to the dean's office. And unbeknownst to me, as a night student, I had not yet heard that Dean Norvell had been summarily dismissed for a number of reasons.
Huh.
And Professor Leocoris was now the acting dean until the school figured out what it was going to do.
Okay.
So I arrived, and the secretary said that Dean Leocoris was now the dean, and she would bring the letter in, and I waited outside. And she called me in and said the dean wanted to talk to me. And I walked in, and he took the letter in front of me, and he had no idea who I was. I had never taken a course with him.
Yeah.
And he ripped it up right in front of me. And he said, if you quit now, you'll always say you could have been a lawyer. But if you stay, someday you'll laugh about this, right?
Yeah.
I never laughed about it, but he did speak of
Do you
my
mind if I
swearing
laugh
as a
about
judge.
it? I mean, thank God, the...
He said to me, tell me what's wrong. I told him I was afraid I was going to go on scholastic probation. I didn't think I could live with that. And
Yeah.
he called the academic dean and said, I don't want her touched. And then I told him that my husband had left. I didn't have any money.
Yeah.
And I was looking for jobs, and he gave me his card, and he told me to go to the district attorney's office, and that he would recommend me for an internship.
This
And
is
it just
Peter
went,
Leocoris.
yeah,
Yeah.
who didn't know me.
Right.
And he took away
You
all
know-
of my excuses.
No. There you go. See,
And I stayed.
that's what you need in a dean, not somebody
Exactly.
that, yeah.
And I have always been grateful to Temple for that.
Hmm.
I mean, that whole campaign they have, Temple made, or Temple took a chance on me.
Yeah.
Temple took a chance on me.
Yeah.
I was nobody. And Peter Lee, of course, literally followed my career through his career.
Isn't that wonderful?
And I mean, I have always been active at the law school,
Uh-huh.
and I'm now executive director of their Center for Social Justice because I always felt I had a debt to pay.
Yeah.
Because of them, my entire life changed. If he took that letter, I'd be a different person today and would have had a different life.
I'm sure they're getting a great deal of value from your participation.
I
too,
hope so.
Judge. Yeah.
I hope so.
Well, that's really interesting. It's a great story. I love that sort of thing. Now, how about on to judge? Now that you're old from when you were 8 years old. Now you finally graduate from law school. I take it and went to work at the DA's office.
No, I worked there in the summer,
While you were studying.
actually.
Okay.
I worked in the summer, and I decided that I wanted to be a DA eventually, but that I should be a law clerk first.
Okay.
That I should work for a judge because I wanted to see, what judges did,
Yeah.
and I wanted to know how to be a good lawyer, and I assumed the judge could tell me that.
Yeah,
And I
right.
wanted to work for a criminal judge. For somebody who had very low grades, I had high expectations. So I wanted to work for a criminal judge because that was a good way to become a DA.
Yeah.
So I applied to criminal judges, and I got a clerkship with a criminal judge whose name I will not tell you because I have never said who it was.
Oh.
But I got a job, and in December of my last year, so I didn't even have to worry my last term, and I went to work. And things worked very well the first month I was there.
Yeah.
And then after that, there were a few little uncomfortable remarks.
Oh.
And then he would never let me take work home. He'd always make me work late in the chambers.
Oh.
And one night he told me, and this is a different world. He told me very matter-of-factly that he expected me to sleep with him. And if I didn't sleep with him, that I would never practice in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, that he would ruin me.
Oh, God.
And I, who had no idea what to do, said, well, I better
Right.
go home and think about it. And therefore I could get out of the chambers. And I went home and decided I may have the shortest career of any lawyer I knew.
Oh, man.
Because the next day I came in and I told him that I didn't want to be his mistress, I wanted to be his law clerk, and so I would give him 2 weeks' notice I was leaving.
Yeah.
And he told me to leave at the end of the week.
Oh.
And I was really lucky.
I mean, after all the things you've been through, and then to run into...
And then to run into him.
Yeah.
I know. And then we shared chambers with Judge Hirsch, who had been the motion judge, civil motion judge.
Yeah.
And he was, in a shakeup, evidently replaced by Judge Gelfand
Uh-huh.
as civil motion judge. And he said that Judge Gelfand needed a second clerk. And he said, why don't you go over and interview?
Yeah.
And I said, well, okay, but I don't know what I'll say. And, who's going to recommend me?
Right.
And Judge Hirsch said, I'll recommend you. I've watched your work.
Good.
So I went over, and I figured I had nothing to lose. When Judge Gelfand asked
That's
me why I
true,
was
yeah.
leaving, I told him the truth.
Uh-huh.
And he was a little taken aback. You know, he
Oh.
was my father's age. He was very
I
staid.
guess so. Oh, really? Okay.
So he was a little taken aback. And he thanked me and he said he'd get back to me. And he went to talk to his best friend, who was Judge Judith Jamison, who became my mentor
Okay.
as a lawyer and a judge. And he said, I don't know what to do. She interviewed well,
Yeah.
but I called the other judge and he, gave her a terrible reference
Oh.
and said that she was, lazy and dumb and all of the other things. And
I
Judge
mean, to be so vindictive,
Yeah.
you know. That's,
So
I'm
Judge
sorry.
Jamison said to him, if he's right, you'll know in a week. If she's right,
That's true.
she's never going to work again. Hire her provisionally for 30 days and
Mhm.
give her a chance.
Yeah.
And so I left on a Friday from that clerkship, and I came home, and there was a message from Judge Gelfand to start on Monday provisionally.
Uh-huh.
And after the first week, he said to me, forget it. It's permanent.
Good.
He said, it's fine.
Okay.
And as stories tend and life tends to go in circles, that other judge, his last assignment on the bench before he retired,
Yeah.
he worked for me. Is that wonderful? For 2 years, he waited for the shoe to drop, and I never let it.
I'll bet he was edgy during that 2 years.
He was very edgy, and there were people. I felt that the AJ may have had an inkling. He was an old timer at that point.
Yeah.
And might have done it on purpose. I don't
Yeah.
know. But I had a wonderful time those 2 years having him work for me.
I'll bet you did. Now, after you managed to get through all of that and law school, then
Yeah, then I started to after I clerked, and I clerked for Judge Gelfand for 2.5 years. I felt I owed him big time.
okay.
And in that 2.5 years, I discovered that I'd fallen in love with civil law. So
Uh-huh.
I put aside being a district attorney.
And the criminal cases.
Yeah, and so I I went to work after I worked for him. I went to work for the Office of Medical Malpractice, which was a state agency. I
Uh-huh.
still had little kids, and I was still a little concerned
Yeah.
about the pressures of litigation.
Natural.
But after a couple of years with them, I then went to work for the city solicitor's office representing Philadelphia General Hospital. I now had an area of expertise, which was medical litigation.
All right.
Yeah, and Judge Jamison, who was always my mentor, had told me that 1983 was the year I should run for judge. And I had only been a lawyer for 8 years.
Uh-huh.
But she said that a number of judges would not be running for retention who had run the first time in 1973. They were getting older or whatever.
Yes.
And that would be a good time. There'd be a lot of openings.
Okay.
And in those days, the
Which
bar,
you have to pay attention to, and it's a good
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
and she told me to get active in politics, and
Uh-huh.
I did, because
Yeah.
that's what you do, and I don't think politics is a dirty word. I think
Yeah.
I was my ward attorney, and I think that a lot of our rights start out on the block to block
Right.
level.
Sure.
So
And it's that kind of a town, anyway.
Yeah,
Yes.
so I sort of made my political stripes as well
Oh.
as trying to learn as much as I could about litigation and try as many cases. And I had to go before the judicial review board from the Bar Association, because in
Oh.
those days they had a 10-year requirement to run for judge and be found recommended by the bar.
Oh, I see.
And of course,
Oh.
I'd only practiced 8 years.
Yeah.
But they said I could go before them, and I told them about getting through law school and going back to school. I was out of school 8 years before I went back.
Mhm.
And I told them I'd been a Cub Scout leader, so I had patience. And
Oh, I
I'd
see.
raised my kids, and they basically gave me 2 years for good behavior. And
Oh,
found me
good.
recommended.
What do you know?
Yeah, and then I got on Wilson Good's ticket. There were 45 people running for 10 positions when I ran.
Mm-hmm.
There were 40 men and 5 women, and there weren't many of us.
No.
And we had some campaign dinners. Wilson Good had a large campaign dinner at one point, and Walter Mondale came in
Yeah.
to help campaign for Wilson Good and also for himself.
Right.
He was a presidential hopeful then.
Okay.
And I was sitting at a table with all male judicial candidates who were endorsed and myself. And Wilson Good brought Walter Mondale over to the table, and he came around and he shook everybody's hand and he wished everybody well. And then he got to me, and he stopped and he said, "And what are you running for?" And I said, "I'm running for the Court of Common Pleas, sir." And he said, "And why do you want to be a judge?" And I looked at him right in the eye and I said, "Because I look fabulous in black." You saw the look in his eye like he knew he had misspoken.
Whoops.
And the others just were quiet until he walked away, and then they all applauded.
Then they
Yeah.
applauded.
Well, the people at my table,
Yeah.
they were some of my colleagues. I ran with people like Mike Stiles and Ted McKee
Right, okay.
and Joe O'Keefe. I mean, and Freddie Messiah Jackson. Actually,
Yeah,
there were 5 women and 4 of us won.
that's great.
It was the year of a woman. We actually, people said to me, "I don't remember your name, but I know I voted for you because I voted for the 4 women."
No, there we go.
We all
That's-
won the primary.
And so
we all
Judge
won.
Jameson was right.
She was very right. She
Yeah.
was always right.
Yeah.
She was always
How
right.
about that? As I mentioned earlier, that some of the judges I've interviewed have found there was a significant difference between the practice of law when they were just starting out compared to the practice of law today. And what do you think about that? How would you compare the two?
Well,
If there are major differences.
I think, and this is of course remembering back.
Yeah.
I'm
God
sorry.
bless you.
I think that people treated each other more respectfully then than now.
Uh-huh.
I know as judges, we're always upset when lawyers don't treat each other civilly, and,
Yeah.
and that's a big issue.
Yeah.
And I don't remember it being quite as difficult. Also, from a woman's perspective,
Mm.
it was much harder then because women were not respected as litigators.
Yeah.
And I think it was more difficult for us, and there were very few role models.
Oh, true. Yeah.
I mean, there were people like Judge Jamison and Judge Rachette who had been litigators.
Right.
There were the Duffy sisters, I remember. But there were very, very few. Barbara Mather, I think, was ahead of me. And so I think that there was a difference in that we felt that we were blockbusting. When I went to work for the city as a solicitor, I was the first woman in major trials.
Oh.
And Alan Davis was the solicitor. And when he hired me, after everything was all said and done and we shook hands and I was on my way out the door, he said, "By the way, there's never been a woman in major trials before. Does that bother you?"
Yeah.
I turned around and said, "Oh, no, it doesn't bother me at all." And then I went in the bathroom and was sick because it did bother me a lot. So that was the kind of blockbuster.
It's not always easy being a pioneer, is it?
No, no. I'm glad I did it because a lot of the women that I mentored, like Nikki Ingram, has just become head of Marshall Dennehy's workers' compensation committee, or department rather, and Shelley Fadulo's a really prominent woman litigator. I mean, and Gilda Kramer, who was my first protege, was a partner at Schneider before she went on her own. So I've watched,
Yeah.
you know, some of these women, and I actually hired Annette Rizzo before I left,
Okay,
and
yeah.
she's was one of my colleagues.
And she's well respected. now.
Very well respected.
I like
I'm very
her.
proud of her. Actually.
Yeah.
Very
and
proud of
I
her.
like that program that she's been working too, that she had, the
Foreclosure.
mortgage foreclosure, yeah.
Yeah, so I guess if it was different, it was different because I think it was more difficult for women. Although I, just recently spoke at the Philadelphia Bar Association luncheon for the Sandra Day O'Connor Award, and I said that a lot of things had changed, but a lot of things haven't changed enough.
Yeah.
There still aren't enough women litigating or women partners, but it's a lot better than it was in the 70s when I was litigating. In the early 80s.
It doesn't seem that long ago, but it can be, well, obviously it's decades, but the world could have seemed different. I mean, almost does seem different then than it is now.
There was less litigation, too, I
Yeah.
think.
Oh, how about that?
I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, I only, litigated, in my small area.
Right.
But when I look at the thousands of cases that are filed now, I'm not sure that we had that many
Yeah.
then.
Speaking of thousands of cases, I wanted to ask you about your prominent role in starting up the Complex Litigation Center here.
Okay. Well, I was assigned the asbestos program
Mm-hmm.
in 1987 as the assistant calendar judge. And I thought I got this great big promotion, and I discovered that the reasons that I got the job is I was the first woman in the civil division. I was the lowest in seniority,
Oh,
and I was too naive to realize that I had been had. Everybody
mm,
else had turned it down.
yeah.
And Judge Blake, my AJ, actually issued an order appointing me because he didn't want to make the call and have me turn it down too. And so I took over the asbestos program from Judge Klein. After he trained me for 6 or 8 months, he gracefully bowed out because
Okay.
he'd had it with it. And I discovered that we had, instead of being promoted, I discovered I was the queen of a 7,800 case backlog.
I was going to
And the
say.
backlog went back to 1975, which was the year I became a lawyer.
Hmm.
And you had plaintiffs who were dying of old age before they got a courtroom, and defense companies were going bankrupt at a really alarming rate, and people were losing their jobs in those companies.
Hmm.
So this litigation was terrible, and it was all stopped. Nobody wanted to try the cases. When Judge Blake said, well, we'll just send a judge every month to help you, that judge would immediately want to take a chambers week or a vacation.
Oh,
Nobody wanted to try the cases.
yeah.
And I didn't understand it. And my husband taught business at Drexel University at that point. He taught organizational development and design. And he said to me, look, you don't know anything about this. And the lawyers, whether you think so or not, know you don't know anything about it.
Okay.
Why don't you go to the lawyers who do these things and ask for their help? And judges don't normally go to lawyers, at least they didn't then.
Yes.
Now we really do. But
Right.
then it was unusual for a judge to ask a lawyer what he or she thought.
Mm-hmm.
So I did. I gathered the lawyers together, and I said that I thought we should have a meeting, and we should talk about the fact that I didn't understand anything, and they could educate me, and we could talk about how we could make this a better program.
Yeah.
And we had the meeting, and I discovered that there were issues well beyond what I could deal with. And at that point, Justice Cappy had become our liaison justice in Philadelphia, and he met
Okay.
with the judges, and he said, if you have any problems, call. So I called, and I said, I have a really big problem.
What do you know?
These 7,800 cases, and I said, I've spoken to the lawyers, and they have a lot of good ideas, but I have no idea how to implement them or what to do.
Mm-hmm.
So he came down to Philadelphia, and he met with the lawyers and me, and he listened to all of their problems, and he said to me in front of them, do you think you can fix this? And I said, well, of course I could fix it. I had no clue how to fix it, but you didn't say that you didn't know the justice of the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And I went back, and I said to my husband, okay, now what? And he said, okay, we're going to put together a business plan. We're going to figure out how we can do this.
Right.
So we had a large meeting again of representatives from every firm, plus people who worked for the court. And Judge Markey was there because he did my motions for me,
Mm-hmm.
and we had some law clerks and a couple of administrators. And Bill said to them, pretend that the entire system was destroyed and we could build it from scratch.
Bill is your husband.
Yes.
Yes.
What would you do? And I was shocked at some of the ideas that came around that table. I mean, these lawyers really had thought about this.
Uh-huh.
And
The
they were-
organization and dynamic of the
They
whole
were
thing.
buying into the fact that we could change things.
Right.
And
And I think the ideas that came out were brilliant. I mean, it turned out to
they
be.
were, and it was a joint venture.
Yes.
This was not something I did alone or Bill did alone. It was a joint venture, and I had ideas too. I figured, okay, we can't try the cases one at a time. There's 7,800 of them,
Yeah.
but they're all sort of like a bus accident. Everybody was involved in the same thing. They
Yeah.
were all exposed to asbestos.
Okay.
The real issues were they sick? And if they were sick, was it caused by asbestos or was it caused by something else? So I got this idea that we could group the cases in groups of 10. and that we could reverse bifurcate them. We could start with these causation and damages and then see what to do about liability, because these were shipyard and factory cases, and pretty much everybody knew what everybody else was exposed to.
Right.
And these were, in those days, these ideas were crazy. But the lawyers felt that they could chance it. And so Bill wrote a business plan, and we submitted this to Justice Cappy and to Judge Diaz, who was my administrative judge then.
Yeah.
And this was in February of 1991 that we actually submitted it. And the next day, Judge Diaz called and said, "You're not going to believe this, but Cappy says he wants to do it. But we need a budget," so
Yeah.
a year later, to the absolute day that I submitted the business plan, which was like a term paper, the Complex Litigation Center opened.
Was born, yes.
And we didn't want to call it the Asbestos Center because we were afraid other programs would get upset.
Right.
So that sounded like good. And the courtrooms, most of them, were oversized because we had the grouped cases.
Right, okay.
And the groups started working. We didn't have computers then, so we did the groups by little 3x5 cards, and we would do like one firm, one plaintiff's firm for each group,
Okay.
and we put their names, one case on each card, and tied them in a rubber band and piled them up. And we were running 20 groups of 10 through the system every month. And we didn't run with judges in commission. We used senior judges.
Okay.
And
right.
they brought a group of judges in. Some of them had never tried a jury trial as a judge. They were family court judges. Some of them had been in criminal waiver rooms, so they
Yeah.
had not done. And these judges were so excited about being part of something new.
Right.
The lawyers put together a little course for them. We had
Uh-huh.
a 48-hour course, and we gave them materials, and they hit the ground running.
Uh-huh.
We shared secretaries, we shared law clerks, so that there were 2 judges to a secretary, 2 to a law clerk,
I see.
and everything worked kind of as a team.
By a team
in
effort.
a
it
team
sounds-
effort.
Right.
And at first my colleagues thought it was hilarious. They called us Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs, because they were all guys. Within 18 months, Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs had almost cleaned up the backlog.
Of 7,800 cases.
I mean, it was because as the cases began to move,
Yeah.
and the lawyers really saw that we had the ability to put 200 cases a month into the courts, you'd be surprised how they started to settle.
I'll bet.
And because they're mass torts, and because they're similar, and there was a limited group of plaintiffs and defense firms, they started settling in big packages of a couple hundred cases in a package.
Okay.
And the cases, literally, the backlog dwindled.
Uh-huh.
It was incredible. We had judges and court administrators from all over the country coming to look at the facility
Yeah.
and look at the systems that were created. And I said they were created by all of us together. And Justice Cappy once told me, confidentially, he was worried that the complex was Sandy Moss dependent. And I said, it's not. And when I left, I did it for 9 years, and when I left, several other judges ran it after me.
Yeah.
And then I came back. About 8 years later, they asked me to come back
Mm-hmm.
and bolster it up again, because it had a lot more programs than just asbestos,
Right,
and they
understood.
felt that it needed some systems revision.
Uh-huh.
The systems that were running were the same as the ones when I left, because the systems were dependent on the complex. And
Okay, right.
at the end of 10 years, we lost our Wanamaker building because we didn't have the money to re-up
The rent.
our lease.
Yeah.
I thought it was amusing in the beginning. I felt like I was sort of like a judicial princess, because I got the
With your
Supreme...
own
Well,
set of courtrooms.
I got the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania to build me a courthouse and a department store, which was pretty cool.
You can just stop downstairs for a handbag.
Exactly. And they used to give the tenants discounts, and I told everybody we weren't allowed to take it. Wanamakers or some of the branders might be in front of us for cases. So
Oh, right, yeah.
people weren't happy, but the court never took advantage of the discount at Wanamakers. And when we came over to City Hall,
Yeah.
the system stayed, and they tried as best they could to set it up. We have our own administrative officers still.
Mm-hmm.
And as many judges as they could, they would put on the sixth floor where the administrative offices were to sort
Oh,
of
right.
keep it. It's not perfect, but they still try and do that
Mm-hmm.
to keep the judges together.
To follow that same system
Yeah,
that
they
you
don't
helped
use,
to inaugurate.
yeah, they don't
Yeah.
use all senior judges anymore,
Right.
but they're still senior judges. They just supplement them with judges in commission.
Mm-hmm.
But there's still usually half the complex litigation center is still run with senior judges, which is, really saving.
Yeah. And
From everybody else.
it's a great idea for those senior judges who want to keep working.
Oh, it's I don't know what I would have done without them.
Yeah.
And, just watching what we still do. I mean, now that we do asbestos, all of the pharmaceutical litigation is there.
Yeah.
There's about 10 pharmaceutical programs. We've done product liability,
Yeah.
mass torts,
Mm-hmm.
orthopedic bone screws, for example. Breast implant litigation was there. Just most recently, there was some kind of a implant for fingers that had
Oh.
arthritis
Yeah.
that there was allegedly a problem with.
Hmm.
So, and also the appeals from arbitration go through there.
Oh, yeah, right.
I couldn't
Forgot
figure it
about
out, but I got conned into it because they told me it was a mass tort because it had a backdrop. So,
well,
it
I
got
know
put
it
there,
did.
too.
It was a fairly hefty one, too. um, how would you, what would you do if a new judge came to you and asked for advice about just how to be a judge?
Actually, they have. Um,
Okay.
what
did
I
you say?
tell them,
Yeah.
I just gave actually one of the new judges some advice. I'm not sure he was so happy with it today.
Okay.
I happened to bump into him and he told me something that had happened, and I said to him, if I were you, I would do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
But one thing is to really work hard. Um, you know, people think if you're a judge, you just sit around and do nothing and go up on the bench in your black robe.
Yeah.
You really need to work hard. Really need to be prepared.
I know that you've adopted this idea yourself. I
Yeah,
know that you're very
but it's
hardworking.
important that a new judge know that, when you go on that bench, you need to be a hot court. You need to have reviewed everything. You need to get the confidence of the lawyers that you know what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
I also told them, never be afraid to tell them you don't know what you're doing.
Mm.
Because lawyers know that. As a new judge, I got put into criminal
Yeah.
because new judges on the court go to criminal or family,
Right.
and I had done neither as a lawyer. I was a civil lawyer from day one. The first time I was in a criminal courtroom, I was the judge. And, they said, all rise. I stood up. I didn't know what else to do. It was mortifying. And I was afraid to say to the lawyers that I didn't know what I was doing. And I
Yeah.
tried to pretend that I did. And then I heard that there was a rumor that they were calling me Gidget with the gavel. And I realized that they probably were right in some respects.
Yeah.
But I squelched it by simply telling them how flattered I was to be called Gidget because she was so attractive. And so
Right.
they stopped doing it. But it taught me a lesson. So after that, I started saying, look, I did not practice criminal law. And so you need to tell me. If you say you want a hearing on something,
Yeah.
you need to tell me the cases you're basing it on, and you need to hand them up to me. And pretty soon, I learned.
Uh-huh.
And then I was okay. And then I learned that when I went back to civil, and I'd been gone for 2 years, 9 months, and 3 days, and things happen.
You know exactly how long you.
Yes, I did.
Yes,
I
okay.
wanted to be back in civil. And so I tell new judges that if you don't understand something, if you're put in a program that you don't know,
Yeah.
then just say it. Say it because the lawyers will appreciate it and they'll want to help you. And pretty soon you will learn.
Yeah.
And that will be okay. So it's to work hard, it's to be not afraid to say when you don't know something, and also to think outside the box.
Uh-huh.
That the way the common law works is it moves along, and it moves along because people think outside the box. And not
Okay.
to be afraid to look at something and say, maybe we could do it better. That's how Judge Rizzo started mortgage foreclosure, because
Yeah.
she thought outside the box
Yeah.
of something that troubled her.
Right.
And, that's what a lot of our judges have done in various programs. So I tell them, in a case, if you see a way to look at it differently, take it up. Rule.
Mm-hmm.
And see what the appellate court does with it. you know, you may end up changing the law. If you have good ideas, don't be afraid to say it. Don't be afraid to call the AJ or the supervising judge of civil or criminal or
And
family.
suggest this or that.
And people say, well, you know, I'm a new judge. I said, yeah, but fresh eyes see things differently.
Mhm.
Stop by. Say, you know what, I was thinking. What if this happened or that
Right.
happened? And we have wonderful administrative and supervising judges, and they've never been afraid to look at something and say, you know, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
So they're kinds of the things that I say. And also, don't distance yourself from the lawyers. And I know that's difficult because there's the whole ethical thing.
Right.
But stay active in the bar.
Okay.
Go to the criminal justice section or the family court section or the civil section
Yeah.
meetings. Open your mouth and listen to what people say. You will find problems that are little teeny ones that might get mentioned, and before they become big ones, you could
You
take
could
that
do
back to
something
your
about
court.
it. Yeah.
Exactly. Or you could have an idea, and the lawyers will say, gee, Judge, that's a really good idea. And now you can go back and say, you know, the bar thinks they might want, you know, to support this kind of thing.
Right.
So that's another thing, is don't forget, and the last thing is,
Yeah.
don't forget where you came from.
Okay.
You know, we were all lawyers. We all got pushed around in at times by other lawyers and by judges.
Mm-hmm.
But as a judge, you know, we have the chance to be different. And, you know, when my children were small and I had nowhere to take them, I brought them to court, and a lot of times I got yelled at by judges for having my children in the courtroom,
Yeah.
even though they behaved themselves. They are much better than at home. And I have had experiences of lawyers who have shown up in my courtroom with kids
Uh-huh.
because the sitter didn't show, or the school was closed because a boiler broke or something like that.
Yeah.
And actually, maybe the last year I was on the bench, one lawyer showed up in a big motion day when the courtroom was jammed. It was this little kid who had to be maybe 6 or 7.
Yeah.
And he had his little kid in the back. And he was looking very anxious, and I could tell by the files he was probably one of the people who had to argue a motion.
Uh-huh.
So I said, under the microphone, I see somebody in the back of the room, and he's got a little kid with him. I said, sir, can you come forward and bring that little boy with you? And now this guy's thinking,
Yeah, right. Uh-oh.
what is going to happen now?
Right.
So he came to the front, and I said, are you here to argue a motion? He said, yes, Your Honor, I am. And I said to the little boy, you want to sit on the bench up with me? And his eyes were like, oh my God, yeah. And the father was like, are you kidding? I said, come on up. And we got a chair, and this is not the first time I've done it. The little boy sat with me,
Yeah.
and I made a big thing of consulting with him on some of the
Oh,
motions.
yeah.
Meanwhile, the father could concentrate on his case.
Yeah.
Because he didn't have to worry about his son.
Right.
And when he
You knew
came,
exactly where he was.
exactly, and when he came up to argue, after the argument was over, and I made sure the other side, I said, look, you know, I can be fair to both sides.
Yeah.
He said, Judge, you know, don't worry about it.
Right.
And it was only discovery court. So I made my ruling. And at the end, I said to the little boy, you know, I can boss your father around. I said, and you're up here with me. Would you like to boss your father around? He said, oh, yeah. I said, well, you tell your father something you want him to do when you get home.
Yeah.
And he did. And that little kid, the father wrote me a lovely note.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
I'm sure it was, you know.
So, you know, that's what you do.
Okay.
And that's what I tell my colleagues that they ought to be doing too.
Right. I mean, just because you're a judge, it doesn't mean that you're not a human being.
Exactly right. Not to forget where you came from.
Right.
That's really important, because if you ever forget, then you're really going to lose your way when it comes to being a judge.
Well, this has been very pleasant. I was wondering, Judge, is there a particular moment or anything, maybe it's the Complex Litigation Center inauguration, that of which you're particularly proud, or any individual case or anything like that?
Well, I think the center's obviously, my husband and I always say that was the baby we never had together.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just the systems or the moving of cases through, it's the people that you've saved on both sides, you know, plaintiff and defense.
Right.
Um,
The numbers represent people. Yeah.
yeah, and I think that, you know, the moments that are most important are when I realized that people were getting trials in their lifetime. I don't care whether they win or lose, but I care that you should die before you can get your due process right
Yeah.
to a courtroom.
Sure.
And so I'm proud that today we pretty much can. We can give people trials, expedited trials,
Yeah.
if they're an extremis.
Okay.
I couldn't do that. I turned away a woman with brain cancer, allegedly, from asbestos, a little old man, a little old woman, probably much younger than me now. But I turned them away because I couldn't give them an expedited trial.
Mm.
And then at lunch, I saw them down on Sansom Street, and they were looking into the window of a jewelry store, and he had his arm around her and he was pointing to things. I knew she wouldn't live 6 months. I read her medical
Mm-hmm.
reports, and I stood on the street and I cried. And I said, that's got to stop,
Yeah.
you know? And the other thing I think I'm proud of are the cases that I've settled. The people that came back, that wrote me letters,
Oh, yeah.
parents who have sent me pictures of children that had been impaired,
Uh-huh.
and we settled the cases. And then years later, they showed, sent me pictures, going to physicians and having them say, I had a case in your courtroom. I was a defendant. And you really understood, that I care about my practice, that I didn't do anything wrong, so to speak.
Yeah, right.
And thank you for that. And when they did my portrait in the court, the painter had a folder in the back of the portrait, and he said that was
Yeah.
for me to put my resume and awards I got and things like that. And I didn't put that in that. In that folder are the letters and the pictures
Oh, really?
and the things, because that's, if I want anybody to know what my judgeship was about,
Those
it was
letters
about
tell the story.
those people that maybe because I was the judge, their lives were a little bit better, whether they were defendants or plaintiffs. And I refused to have my portrait painted with a robe
Mm.
because I felt that if I did anything for my court, I used to say it was at the boardroom and the bargaining table. It was creating management systems that got people justice earlier.
Yeah.
And it was settling cases. And like the 8-year-old kid that I was, I wanted to make everything right. And I hope that that's what I did during the time that I sat on the bench.
Well, congratulations. I think you've achieved that,
I hope so.
that goal.
Sure.
And thank you very much again for being here today, Judge Sandra Moss.